To tip or not to tip. Exploring tipping habits. On some occasions, it's common to leave a little extra money, known as a tip, to waiters. It's a way of saying thank you. But have you ever wondered where the word tip comes from? And did you know that different cultures have different attitudes toward tipping? This article will give you some tips on tipping. Some people believe the word tip was first used in the 18th century in English coffee houses and bars. They say customers would put coins into a box labeled "to ensure promptness," which they shortened to tip. However, no one has ever found any of these tip boxes or even a mention of them in old writings. Besides, the use of English acronyms, where the first letters of words make a new word, really grew in the 1940s. The word tip actually comes from Old English slang that means to give something. It shows friendliness or sharing something helpful, such as advice.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to English for You. I'm Mike.
I'm Chickling.
And today we're beginning a 2-day international culture article all about the secret art of tipping. Or not tipping. So we're going to be talking about to tip or not to tip, exploring tipping habits. I say it's a secret art because in the countries where it is expected, where you should tip people for giving service, it's kind of hard to know what to tip, how much, right? You don't want to do the wrong thing. If you live in places where tipping is common, you kind of know how to do it. If you're lucky enough to live in a place where tipping is not common, and I say lucky because it saves you money, that's all great. But that's great until you travel to another part of the world where you are expected to tip and you don't exactly know what you're doing. So for that reason, this article should be very interesting. We're especially going to be focusing on why people tip and what parts of the world this culture of tipping, or tipping culture, as it's sometimes called, is more common. So let's get to the article and see what this is all about. We begin by reading, on some occasions, it's common to leave a little extra money, known as a tip, to waiters. Yeah, that's probably the most common time you would leave a tip is in a restaurant to the waiter at the end of the meal as you are leaving. You pay the bill and then you leave a little bit extra money as a tip for that waiter. And you do this on some occasions. An occasion is a certain or particular time that is unique or interesting or memorable or, something you want to focus on. So when we say on some occasions with tipping, that would be in a nicer restaurant where you sit down, the waiter comes over, brings you your food, takes your order, fills your water glass, that kind of thing. On other occasions, like in a fast food restaurant or at a coffee shop or somewhere like that, or where you're getting takeaway food, that place, that kind of place or that kind of time, it might not be you might not be expected to tip. So that's why we say on some occasions, but not all the time. Here's an example of this word occasion. I visited Japan on several occasions before, but I've still never been to Osaka.
所以 occasion 就是时刻的意思或时节，所以有时候我们英文我们这边讲到的On some occasions 就是有时候，那特殊场合的英文就是 special occasion。比如说 they save the expensive bottle of wine for a special occasion like their anniversary。所以在某些场合呢，我们给服务生留小费是很正常的。那我们也在今天看到文法，我们先看一下今天的 language and focus。今天的 language and focus 我们要讲到的是 be known as something 或者是 be known to do something or be known for something。 今天后面如果是 be known as something or someone 意思就是被称作什么。比如说 the city is known as the cultural capital of the country, famous for its museums and theaters。 那么如果今天是 be known to do something 意思就是以什么你做什么事情让人所知哦。我们用不定词 to be 去引出你做的事迹。比如说 She is known to be a skilled pianist, often captivating audiences with her performances。 或者是说今天是 be known for something 代表你以什么特色别人去认识你。比如说 The restaurant is known for its mouth-watering desserts。
All right, back to the article. So, why are we tipping? That's another good question. It's a way of saying thank you. The article continues and tells us. So, yeah, you tip to say thank you to a waiter or waitress, a serving person, for example, in a restaurant or someone who helps you, especially if they've done good service for you. But have you ever wondered where the word tip comes from? A great question in the article.
所以我们很常给小费就是表示谢谢，但大家有没有想过为什么小费叫做 tip 这个词是哪里来的呢？
Okay, next in the article we read, and did you know that different cultures have different attitudes toward tipping? That's right. So it's very cultural. Different cultures, different people around the world, different countries around the world have different attitudes. We'll talk about that word in a second. So this article we read will give you some tips on tipping. All right, so an attitude is basically a feeling or a position or an opinion about a certain something or a certain person or certain situation. So how you feel about it, that is your attitude. We often talk about having a good attitude or a bad attitude. If you enjoy something, you generally have a good attitude. If you don't like something, maybe you haven't tried it, you've just heard bad things about it, then you wouldn't have a very positive, you would have a negative attitude. Here's an example sentence. Attitudes about fast fashion are changing, with more young people spending their money on clothes that last longer.
所以 attitude 就是心态啊或态度的意思。比如说我们今天就讲对某事的心态。Someone's attitude towards something or someone. 比如说 she has a positive attitude toward challenges, seeing them as opportunities to grow. 所以你们知道呢，不同文化其实对小费是有不同的态度吗？我们今天会给大家一些有关于小费的建议。
Okay, next we read, some people believe the word tip was first used in the 18th century in English coffee houses and bars. Yeah, it is an interesting word. To tip is to give that little bit of money for service, but we can also give someone a tip, and that doesn't always mean money. That can also mean advice or, my best suggestion to you. But we can also use it for this money that we give to serving people. And some people believe this came from 18th century or the 1700s in England when coffee houses and bars first became popular.
那我们来看一下哦，所以其实呢 tip 这个字有些人认为第一次出现是在18世纪的英国咖啡馆跟酒吧。So yeah, why did they use that back in the 18th century?
Well, good question. I'm not quite sure how really true this is to history, but this is what a lot of people believe. They say customers in these coffee houses 300 years ago, they say customers would put coins into a box labeled to ensure promptness, which they shortened to tip. So basically, you're giving a little bit of extra money for faster service. That is what the box labeled to ensure promptness is sort of telling you. To ensure is like to make sure. Promptness is quickness, right? Someone does something quickly for you. And then, of course, this is shortened from to ensure promptness to TIP, tip. And this was maybe the way it was. We're not sure, and we're not even sure if these boxes were really labeled that. But to label something is to put a label or a marker on something and then probably to write information on that label or marker. So this is you have a product or something in your home. You want to make sure you know about it. You want to make sure you bring people's attention to it. So you would put an extra thing on it. Might be a bit of tape that you can write on. You might attach a little piece of string to it and tie some paper to that string, more like the label, which we also can use as a noun, the labels on clothes in stores, right? If you buy a shirt in the store, they'll have a label on it that shows the price. Once you get that home, you cut off that label. But even on the inside of the shirt, by the neck, there might be another label, and this shows you the shirt is made of cotton, where it was made, the company that made it, and there might even be a label that shows you how to wash that shirt. So all of these little bits of extra paper or cloth are attached to things, and they have useful information written on them for you to use. Here's another one where you'd want to use labels carefully. The scientist put the sample into a container and then labeled it with the time and date. Scientists have to keep track of the things they're studying, so they would often put labels on things, but cooks in restaurants do too. They might label when they made a sauce or how old vegetables are, so they know when to throw them away.
所以 label 这边是指给什么加标签，给什么标记。比如说 The jars had a label for each type of jam, making it easy to find your favorite flavor. 就是它每个罐子上面都有果酱的标记哦。那么我们看到另外一个动词 ensure 就是保证确保，所以以前的 tip它就是来自于 to ensure promptness 这3个字，所以它把它们 shorten, which they shorten to tip, T-I-P. Now, what does shorten stand for here?
Shorten just means to make something shorter, right? So you have something that is a certain length, and if you do something to make it shorter by cutting it, maybe, or if we're talking about time, by ending early, you are shortening that thing. For example, our boss decided to shorten the meeting because he had to catch an airplane. Normally it's a 1-hour meeting, but we only had a half-hour meeting because he had to leave early, so we shortened that meeting.
所以呢 shorten 就是缩短的意思哦，将什么东西缩短。所以比如说 they decided to shorten the duration of the meeting to allow more time for discussion， 就是也是把什么东西缩短。所以呢顾客呢那时候会把硬币放到一个标有为了保证迅速服务的盒子里，所以短语就被缩写成 tip, T-I-P 了。
Okay, back to our article. So we're talking about how in the 18th century in British coffee houses, especially in London, people would have this box to ensure promptness, to make the waiters bring your coffee a little faster, and people shortened that to tip to ensure promptness. It's a great story, and I've definitely heard it before. I think a lot of people will tell you, oh, tip, yeah, that stands for to ensure promptness, to make sure you get fast service in a restaurant. A lot of people believe this. But here's the problem. However, the article says no one has ever found any of these tip boxes or even a mention of them in old writings. We have a lot of writings from the 18th century, especially in London, especially around coffee houses. We know who went there, what they used to drink, what they used to do there. And in all of these stories and journals and diaries and articles, no one has ever mentioned these tip boxes, the word tip, the idea of giving a tip. It's never really come out through the history of the actual time. So I'm not sure how much of a fact this might mean, since, as we said, no one has mentioned it, all right? That is a mention. So when you give someone a mention, you bring it up in your article. You talk about it in your speech. So to mention something is to refer to something or to talk about something, all right? It's not the main thing I'm talking, but I bring it up. It's not the main person that I'm interested in, but I say their name, all right? So if I mention something, it just means that word or that idea or that place. It came up in our conversation. It was included in my speech or in my writing, but it's not the main focus of it. It was kind of just a little side point, a little bit of interesting extra information. Here's an example. The new student got a mention from the teacher for his excellent homework. The teacher is not talking about the student. The teacher is just saying, oh, by the way, Joe did really well on his homework. And then we'll go on and have a whole other conversation about a totally different topic. But I mentioned Joe in my speech, in my talk.
所以 mention 就是去提及说到，所以没有人发现过这些 tip 的盒子。也甚至呢，在古老的文献中都没有提到过哦。
All right, back to the article. Besides, we go on to show why this idea of the tip coming from these coffee houses. Here's another reason we think that this may not be the true story. Besides, the use of English acronyms, where the first letters of words make a new word, really grew in the 1940s. Aha, okay, very interesting too. A, we have no mention of these tip things in writing from the time of the coffee houses where the story says they first started. But here's another thing, besides. When we use besides here, it's sort of like furthermore and in addition, something like that. So besides, the use of English acronyms. What's an acronym? It gets explained right there in the sentence where the first letters of words make a new word. So when we say USA or ROC or iOS or something like that, NASA, NASA, all of those words are made up of the first letter of other words. United States of America, USA. So this idea of tip to ensure promptness. That's an acronym, but acronyms really grew, it says, in the 1940s, around World War II time, about 200 and so years ago, 200 and so years after, apparently, they were using this acronym in coffee shops in London. Acronyms were not common back at that time, all right? So they grew, they came along and became more popular much, much later. Yes, when we say besides, it's like we're saying moreover, furthermore, also, in addition. When you have an idea that you want to add on to an idea that came before, they're connected in some way, but they're not the same idea. So you can kind of bring this into the conversation by saying, and also, here's another thing besides, here's my second point or something like that. For example, sorry, I'm just too busy to go shopping with you this weekend. Besides, I'm trying to save money for my trip to South America next year. So there's two good reasons, not the same reason. They're kind of unrelated, but there are two good reasons why I can't go shopping. I'm too busy right now, and I'm trying to save money for next year. Two reasons there.
所以呢 besides 就是而且此外，比如说除此之外呢怎么样 Besides being a talented musician, she is also a skilled painter. 所以她两个身份都有。那 acronym 指的就是首个字母的缩略词，所以英文缩写呢就是用词语的首字母组成的一个新词使用。实际上呢是在1940年代开始才普及的哟。
Okay, so if tip doesn't come from those to ensure promptness boxes in old coffee shops, where does it come from? Good question, and we wrap up by reading the word tip actually comes from Old English slang that means to give something. To tip something 1,000 or more years ago in Old English would have meant something like to give. Hey, can you tip me that broom? I want to sweep the floor. Maybe something like that. It shows friendliness or sharing something helpful, such as advice, which is maybe where we get the idea from, let me give you a tip, let me give you some helpful advice.
所以 slang 就是俚语的意思，也出现一个片语是 such as， 就是比如。所以 tip 这个字其实是来自于英文的俚语，意思就是给予某物，去表示友善啊，或者是分享一些有用的东西，像说是建议的部分哦。
Okay, so now we know where tipping culture started. Sort of. We're going to find out more about where tipping culture exists in the world today in tomorrow's article. But for now, we have our chat question. How do you think workers feel about receiving tips for their service?
I think it really depends on where you are, but I think most workers will feel happy about it because you know that this is a way of showing gratitude, right?
Yeah, I think even places where they don't expect it, they might know you're a tourist and this is normal and you're trying to do something nice. Although, as we will learn tomorrow, and you might want to come back for this, in some parts of the world, if you give them a tip because you're trying to be nice, they might actually be insulted. Very interesting. So come back and check that out with us. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
所以听完今天的节目，还学得不够尽兴吗？欢迎到空中家教跟老师们一起做口说练习哦。
Vocabulary Review.
Occasion. I visit the bank on Mondays, but on the last occasion it was so busy that I couldn't get any service. Attitude. I don't like Barry's attitude. He's lazy and often very rude to people. Label. I label my lunch boxes with my name so no one else will eat my lunch. Shorten. I had to shorten my kite string so it wouldn't fly too high. Mention. Sally didn't make any mention of her birthday because she didn't want to celebrate it. Besides. Vegetables are very healthy for your body. Besides, they're delicious.
智慧小补帖
Ensure. Acronym. Slang.